The Emperor required a weapon that would never place its own needs above the needs of the Imperium. He needed a weapon that would never bite the hand that feeds. The World Eaters were not such a weapon. We always unsheathed our blades merely to shed blood, and all of us rejoiced after victory in a war that should never have begun. We are not the submissive, loyal pets the Emperor wanted. Wolves obey where we do not. Wolves can be trusted, but not us. They possess a discipline we lack, for their rage is not kindled by the itch of the butcher's nails in their skulls. They always come when called, which is why it's puzzling they call themselves wolves. The Emperor has trained them and put them on a leash, making them fulfill his every whim. But wolves do not behave like this, only dogs do. That is why we are now the World Eaters, not the Warhounds. Kharn the Betrayer, a Chaos Space Marine from the traitorous legion of the World Eaters, and the greatest mortal champion of Kharn. He currently leads his own band of World Eaters, known as the Butcher Horde. Kharn, only surpassed in aggression and bloodthirst by the demonic primarch of the World Eaters, Angron, has lived a life of murder and betrayal, spilling blood and collecting skulls for his patron in uncountable numbers. In battle, Kharn fights where the combat is most fierce, wielding his heavy chain axe, Gorechild, which along with its twin axe, Gorefather, were Angron's weapons during the Horus heresy. This dreadful axe, rimmed with indestructible teeth from the mica dragon, ceaselessly rises and falls, decapitating heads and claiming skulls. Kharn embodies Khorne, personifying the blood god's thirst and primal fury in the realm of mortals. The legend of Kharn began thousands of Terran years ago during the Emperor's Great Crusade. He was a member of the 12th Legion, then known as the Warhounds and the precursors to the World Eaters. Kharn was born on Terra, the cradle of humanity, and became one of the first neophytes recruited, becoming part of the nascent legion of the Warhounds. After selection, he and the other neophytes trained under the watchful eye of Centurion Gruner on the training grounds of Bot, a vassal world of the Warhounds. The Master of Neophytes, a weapon of terror and a veteran of the Unification Wars, was a famed warrior of the Legion. The mighty torso of the Centurion was adorned with a detailed tattoo, depicting a dog-like predator playing with its prey. Though the neophytes' surgical scars from the enhancements had barely healed, they readily embarked on their training. Gruner introduced Kharn to the contest, an ancient and firmly established tradition of the 12th Legion. All warhounds were required to partake in the contest, the rules of which proved quite simple. The first Astartes to collect 1,000 skulls was the victor. When one of the neophytes, comrades of Kharn, inquired about the reward for victory, Gruner merely shrugged, as he did not know the answer, for no one had ever come close to that number before. After Kharn cautiously asked, "And where do they need to gather skulls?" The giant with the tattoo burst into thunderous laughter, drawing the attention of other battle brothers and neophytes nearby, becoming witnesses to the first humiliation of Kharn. This lesson he would not forget for the rest of his days. This event did not prevent Kharn from surviving the trial to become a full-fledged Astartes and quickly climbing up the ranks. His impressive talents in close combat and melee skirmishes distinguished Kharn within the Legion as one of the most fierce, effective and remorseless killers of the nascent Imperium. And by the time the Great Crusade found Primarch Angron, Kharn already bore the title of Centurion of the elite 8th Assault Company of the 12th Legion. At that time he was described as a deeply tanned warrior with an elongated and noble countenance. However, the reunion of the Warhounds with their Primarch proved to be far from a joyous event for the 12th Legion. Angron, enraged by his rescue by the Emperor of Mankind, which he perceived as the vilest betrayal of his fellow gladiators, was locked in the cargo hold after being delivered aboard the 12th Legion's flagship Conqueror. Captains and commanding officers of the Warhounds, confident in their ability to persuade the Primarch, descended one after another. But Angron killed them all until Kharn came, remaining one of the few surviving officers of his rank, and the only one who dared to face the lethal giant face to face. Calmly and unflinchingly he walked through the room, drenched in his brother's blood, not flinching even when the shadow of Angron rose over a mountain of corpses in power armor. Primarch immediately attacked him and both warriors engaged in a merciless fight. Kharn, who, like the other officers, swore to the Emperor that he would not raise his hand against the Primarch, regardless of any provocations or orders, did not resist his genetic father's harsh treatment. And yet, despite his passivity, Kharn fought probably in the hardest struggle of his life. He fought against his own body, which wanted to give in to pain and oblivion, against the training that prompted him to self-defense, and against the very nature that demanded bowing before the Primarch and accepting fate. In the end, Kharn lay at Angron's feet, lying on his back, broken and shattered. Despite this, he remained defiant, neither screaming nor begging for mercy, but telling of the battles in which he had fought, about the warhounds, the other legions, and the Emperor. Thanks to this display of valor, he was able to reach Angron, who stayed his hand, realizing that the Space Marines of the 12th Legion were not a mob of dishonorable and worthless warriors, as the Primarch had deemed them. In the end, this tranquil bravery earned Angron's respect and convinced him that leading the Legion was not a noose around the neck, but a mantle of power on the mighty shoulders of a Primarch. A mantle that allowed for free travel among the stars, leading an endless war with glorious slaughter. The impressive reputation of Kharn became legendary when Angron made the warrior who pulled him from despair his Primarch's advisor, named Equerry. Nonetheless, there were many both within and outside the Legion who doubted Angron's wisdom, though they respected his choice. Primarily, the advisor was supposed to act as a counterbalance to the Primarch and question his decisions. Despite all his martial qualities, Kharn lacked patience, insight, or oratorical skills, and instead of tempering and directing the words and actions of the Primarch with his own wisdom, he often plunged into the fiercest clashes right after his Primarch and killed all who had escaped death from the two chain axes of Angron in the heat of battle. Any words of restraint were quickly forgotten, and in Angron's shadow, Kharn began to change, becoming more aggressive and unstable. Previously restrained, reckless traits surfaced, and Angron's use of the butcher's nails, cybernetic skull implants that boosted aggression, only accelerated Kharn's fall into madness. The butcher's nails stimulated a warrior's adrenaline production, leading to greater strength and aggression in battle. When activated, they inhibited the production of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the human brain to stimulate instinctual aggression. They also killed all other forms of emotional response and neuroelectric activity in the brain, except for that which regulated the flow of adrenaline. Any attempt to remove the implants turned out to be fatal, as the brain began to completely rely on the regulation of neurotransmitters. The nails were a form of archaeotech belonging to the dark age of technology. The technology of implants originated on the world of Nuceria, where they were used by the ruling aristocracy on gladiators to enhance their combat abilities, turning already formidable fighters into ruthless killers, barely controlled between each gladiatorial combat. The subsequent implantation of a crude parody of the nails into the legionnaires turned the World Eaters into savage killers and led them to their ultimate fall and curse, and swift allegiance to the blood god Kharn. Kharn and his brethren, consumed by a thirst for battle, became easy prey for the dark gods, and were among the first to join Horus in his war against the Emperor. With newfound fury, Kharn fought during the heresy, finally encountering worthy opponents in the form of the loyal Space Marines. It seemed that Kharn had his own plans for the captain of the World Eaters, and every blood-soaked zone of conflict brought the final transformation of Kharn into a slave of the blood god closer. It was assumed that in the role of advisor to the Primarch and captain of the 8th Company, Kharn would be the cool head who would temper the bloody frenzy of Angron. Despite this, even before the Horus heresy, he was known as a brilliant but volatile warrior. The first description of Kharn as a servant of chaos appeared during the massacre of loyalists on Istvan III, where the infamous World Eater was described as a man consumed by dark madness. This happened during the clash with Gavial Loken, a loyalist captain of the Sons of Horus. The process of his corruption is not shown in detail. "I am the eightfold path," he told Loken, and these words are a description of the Kharnate philosophy. which involves freeing the self from attachments and delusions, leading to an understanding of the true nature of things. The 8 is the sacred number of Kharn. Only by this did Kharn explain his sudden transformation. It was believed that during the battle, Kharn was killed by Loken, a loyalist who was firmly intent on preventing Horus from successfully completing the massacre of the loyal Spacemarines on Istvan III and stopping the attack by the traitor primarch on Terra. Kharn engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Loken, during which the World Eater was monstrously wounded, having been thrown onto the teeth of a tank's dozer blade, which pierced his chest. However, the resilience and favour of Kharn allowed him to return to life. 6 solar months after the Emperor sanctioned the scouring of Prospero, a captain of the Thousand Suns named Menis Caliston led a detachment of his battle brothers onto the devastated surface of their homeworld in search of any signs of survivors or their primarch Magnus the Red. Instead, the legionnaires of the Thousand Suns were surprised to discover much larger forces of the traitorous World Eaters, who had also descended on Prospero for their own vile reasons. In the ensuing clash, most of the detachment was killed, and an unconscious Caliston was captured by Kharn. When the captain finally came to, he found himself tied to a chair. Moreover, his innate psychic powers were seriously weakened. Caliston was interrogated by someone who remained in the shadows. The captain's clouded eyes caught glimpses of his tormentor's appearance from the darkness. Believing he had glimpsed the grey-hued power armour, the officer of the Thousand Suns mistook his captor for a despised Astartes of the Space Wolves, who had annihilated his homeworld. The Caliston's tormentor desired to know why the captain opted to return to Prospero. Eventually, Caliston realized that in the near-total darkness, the interrogator's armor was not grey, as he first thought, but a dingy white. Once, the captor's pauldrons were brightly blue, though now the outer surface of the battle plates was covered in a semi-transparent layer of red-brown dirt. The Caliston's tormentor turned out to be a warhound from the 12th Legion, or as they had begun calling themselves, the World Eater. For the captain of the Thousand Suns, this name was an aberration, a distortion of everything the Astartes legions fought for. When Caliston regained his clarity of mind, he slowly came to realize that his captor teetered on the brink of madness. Upon taking a closer look at his tormentor, the captain noted iron spikes embedded into the flesh of his head. The Emperor had forbidden the Astartes from using such brain implants, and not without reason. They heightened the aggression of the shock troops and maintained it, transforming already testosterone-fueled superhuman killers into truly ferocious slayers. Caliston understood he was in the presence of the feral Kharn, who took from his armor an iron pendant in the shape of a wolf's head, battling on a crescent moon. Kharn explained to the captive that the World Eaters had come to Prospero specifically for this item, known as the Moon Wolf. Once, it was part of a warrior's power armor, and Magnus the Red had used it in a witchcraft ritual to establish a connection with Horus. Now, the Moon Wolf could once again be used for the same purpose. Nevertheless, Caliston quickly realized that the World Eater had come to Prospero for a different reason. For inside, he seemed consumed by an agony that could only be quelled by killing. Waiting for the right moment, the captain of the Thousand Suns began prompting Kharn to reveal his true intentions. Caliston persisted in drawing answers from the World Eater, while slowly his psychic powers began to return. Attempting to take control of the situation, the captain subtly persuaded Kharn through words and innate psychic abilities. Caliston realized that the World Eater had come to Prospero in search of specific mystical devices capable of healing his affliction. The Thousand Suns legionnaire explained to Kharn that there was still time, and although the sorcery devices once used by the Thousand Suns were destroyed, the captain himself possessed the necessary knowledge to replicate their functionality. He could aid in healing the fractured mind of the World Eater, remove the brain implants, and restore his dwindling humanity. Caliston could help quell the fire that drove Kharn forward, urging the warrior to commit acts of spontaneous violence he so despised. The captain of the Thousand Suns knew that Kharn was lost in a universe of pain, and the only escape he found was through the process of killing, a common curse among those who fell victim to the corruption of the blood god Kharn. Kalistan understood that his words reached a shard of Kharn's old personality that continued to fight. However, then the World Eater was seized by rage, and he returned to the reality of painful existence. Kharn, with a roar, lunged at the legionnaire of the Thousand Suns, intending to tear him limb from limb. In desperation, Kalistan called upon the remaining reserves of his psychic strength and managed to break free from the shackles, following this with a series of mental attacks on the rage-consumed officer of the World Eaters. However, it was all in vain, for Berserk Kharn had only fragments of his remaining sanity, and nothing could convince him not to commit the murder he had planned. Beaten to death, Kalistan pondered that he had given Kharn a choice. When the thirst for killing and the madness of the World Eater subsided, he would reflect on his choice and realize that he could have turned back. Kalistan foresaw that in the near future, Kharn would become unrestrained and turn to the force that seeks to use his rage for its own purposes. No one else would control him, for even the World Eater himself had lost any control over himself, becoming the true mortal embodiment of the endless and thoughtless death-thirst of the blood god. At some point during the Horus heresy, the legions of the World Eaters and the Word-Bearers united and led a shadow crusade into the realm of Ultramar. Then, the 12th Legion participated in a campaign against the Ultramarines on the war world called Armatura. The 13th Legionnaires, opposing the fierce assault on the planet, managed to lure the fury-engulfed World Eaters into a trap when they attacked the main district of the ruined capital. The Ultramarines collapsed the building, burying the World Eaters and their primarch Angron under tons of rubble. The double chain axes of the primarch were rendered useless as they lost their teeth during the relentless battle. After Angron managed to dig himself out of the rubble, he discarded the useless axe of the Gorechild aside. When the battle ended, Kharn found and took the discarded weapon. He realized the risk of incurring the Primarch's wrath as it went against the superstitions of Angron, which entailed that inherited weapons bring misfortune. It was a gladiator's whim that remained with him from Nuceria. Kharn ignored the indignation of his battle brothers and handed the discarded weapon to the Dark Mechanicum fleet of the 12th Legion, ordering the senior magi to restore the axe to its former glory. He also tasked the Menial Mechanicum with clearing an area on Armatura to find the chain axe teeth from the Mika dragons of the world of Luther McIntyre, transforming the Gorechild into the terrifying weapon it once was. Not all the teeth could be retrieved, as the planet was destroyed by purging fire before the Mechanicum could finish clearing. Kharn had to improvise. Most likely with a hammer in hand, he came to the Mika dragon skulls in the Legion's Conquest Museum aboard the Conqueror, the flagship of the 12th Legion, where, without a doubt, he took teeth to restore the weapon. That era has passed into history, but Kharn still wields the Gorechild, and the awe-inspiring art of the traitor to kill anyone in his path has truly become legendary among the servants of the ruinous powers. When the Horus heresy finally came to its last phase, during the siege of the Imperial Palace at the Battle for Terra, Kharn led the forefront of each assault by the World Eaters. It was he who caused the breakthrough of the defence's first lines at the Lion's Gate, the enormous spaceport of the Emperor's Palace. Empowered by the Blood God, Kharn was able to break through the line of the defenders' war machines with his bare hands. This is why one of Kharn's hands remains bare to this day. The force of the blow was so great that his armor shattered, but the flesh was unharmed, protected by the blessings of Kharn. There, at the Lion's Gate, he accepted the challenge of the fearsome swordman of the Imperial Fists, Sigismund. In the fight, he managed to inflict terrible wounds on the first captain of the Imperial Fists and triumphed, but his rage and obsession with slaughter could have played a cruel joke on him. When he rushed at the retreating ranks of the Imperial Fists, and engaged in combat with Primarch Rogel Dawn at the Lion's Gate, the father of the Imperial Fists easily threw Kharn aside, breaking his bones and tearing off his armor. At that moment, Kharn was saved by the self-sacrifice of Zardu Lyak, who managed to weaken the Emperor's shield over his palace with a terrible ritual and wound Dawn. Kharn was the first of his legion to breach the walls of the Imperial Palace and collected more skulls than any other legionnaire of the 12th. By the time Horus was defeated, mortally wounded Kharn already lay atop a huge pile of the traitorous assault troops before the walls of the inner palace. His companions, the World Eaters, took Kharn's body with them and retreated to the landing ships amidst fighting. For a long time, the captain lay unconscious, teetering on the brink of death within the bowels of the World Eaters' flagship, while the other Legion captains debated who should lead the 12th. Only when one officer killed another during the dispute over Kharn's body did he rise from the dead, reanimated by the freshly spilled blood that had sprinkled his flesh. Kharn's battle brothers discovered that, thanks to some dark miracle of the blood god, he was still alive. It remains a mystery whether Khorne himself breathed life into the berserker's body, or if the insatiable thirst for battle prevented his spirit from departing. But since the end of the Horus heresy, Kharn has survived the bloodiest of battles and has never come as close to death as he did then. The World Eater vowed that the sons of Angron would never again know defeat, for he would not allow it to happen. Either their enemies would fall, or they themselves would offer up to Khorne. The search by the World Eaters for their homeworld in the Eye of Terror became a defining point in Kharn's history. It was during this time that the former equerry became both a legendary and infamous figure among the berserker warriors of his own legion. After the battle for Terra, many wanted Kharn to lead the World Eaters, for Angron had ascended to demonhood and once again disdainfully rejected his legion. First and foremost, the World Eaters needed a home in the Eye of Terror, where they could rebuild their strength and strike back at the loathed Imperium. This search led them to the demon world Skalathrax. This cursed place, which had been inhabited by the Eldari before its fall, also became a target for the Emperor's children, who wished to obtain the ancient soul stones and feed them to their corrupted god. Soon the two legions clashed in a fierce bloody war for control of the world, and Kharn was at the forefront of every battle. However, the presence of the legions upset the ancient balance of Skalathrax, and as the Astartes battled each other, an unnatural cold crept in from the void. Shocked by conditions that even affected their superhuman metabolism, the treacherous Astartes of the Emperor's children and the World Eaters forged a temporary truce and took shelter, for the frosty night was so harsh that it could kill a Spacemarine in moments. The thought of delaying the slaughter, even for a single night, drove Kharn into a terrifying fury. He flew into a rage when he saw his fellow legionaries retreating back to the shelters like cowards, then took a flamethrower and destroyed the shelters, creating an uncontrollably spreading fire. Kharn rampaged through the dying world, killing with equal fury both the World Eaters and the Emperor's children. The flame of his flamethrower turned numerous legionnaires into ash, while the chain axe Gorechild killed those who tried to stand in the path of the former captain. In the ensuing chaos, Kharn was attacked by 3 unknown warriors, but the unyielding berserk charged at his enemies. A stray bolt round struck his breastplate, and with a mighty swing of the chain axe, Kharn sent one of the foes to the afterlife. Then he turned and bisected the bolter of the second attacker, before throwing his lifeless body to the ground. Kharn made a swift thrust, Gorechild to the left, and the chain axe deeply embedded into the throat of the last Astartes, whose arterial blood sprayed into the air. Kharn, standing over the sprawled warrior who clung to his weapon with all his might, recognized the face of the assailant. It was the old centurion Gruna. Cornered amidst the corpses of fallen brothers, Gruna spoke of madness and betrayal, cursing Kharn for daring to kill the battle brothers of his own legion. However, Kharn merely laughed at these words. He was the greatest champion berserk of the 12th Legion. It was the former captain who ascended the walls of the imperial palace, and his broken body was carried from Terra last after he killed 1 million minions of the false emperor in the slaughter that followed the breach of Lion's Gate. No one will ever surpass him in the number of kills. The contest finally ended, and the victor was Kharn. He believed the reason for the defeat in the battle for Terra was the weakness of the heretic Astartes, both of other traitor legions and the World Eaters themselves. Filled with contempt for the weakness of fellow Astartes, the Chosen of Kharn beheaded his former training officer and continued to massacre the Emperor's children and World Eaters during the brutal night of Skalathrax, earning himself the title of Betrayer, which he was awarded for single-handedly causing the split of the unity of the Legion and turning the 12th into scattered bands of Kharnate berserkers. These remnants of the Legion's once great hosts would remain divided over the next 10,000 years. They would reunite and fight as one only in the First War for Armageddon. After the massacre on Skalathrax, the World Eaters were split into roaming war bands, and Kharn himself disappeared in the Eye of Terror. Venturing in search of new enemies, during this time Kharn the Betrayer became known as the most outstanding champion of Kharn, for no one even came close to his tally of kills. Carried by the warp winds of the Eye of Terror, whispers tell that the pile of skulls beside the throne of the Blood God is the sole offering of Kharn, and with each day it grows ever larger. Although Kharn revels in all forms of murder and violence, nothing pleases him more than hand-to-hand combat, a true test of martial skills, untainted by advanced technologies or psychic tricks. Because of this, Kharn became the exemplar warrior in the eyes of the Blood God. Nearly all his killings the former captain performs with the axe Gorechild, and his armour is bathed in the blood from the stumps of the necks of fallen enemies as the World Eater decapitates them. Sometimes Kharn resorts to other methods of killing, such as in the factory world of Ulcer during the Blood Torrent War. When his axe got stuck in the hull of a Mechanicus war machine and the plasma pistol broke from excessive use, the Betrayer turned the sharp edges of the Factorum's solid surface into his own instruments of death, impaling screaming Imperial guardsmen on grinding gears or flaying the skin from their faces, pressing bodies into roaring conveyors. So grand was the massacre that the huge Manufactorum ceased to work, as its mechanisms were clogged with the shredded remains of more than 1,000 pulverized corpses. Kharn is famed for being the first to enter battle and the last to leave it, reflecting the ancient battle of the traitor during the siege of the Imperial Palace. During the mayhem and chaos of the Seventh Black Crusade in the year 811 of the 37th millennium, Kharn was the first to board the Blood Angel's strike cruiser Sanguine Tear, breaking through the void lock after his own ship crashed into the hull of the vessel. For several bloody solar minutes, the traitor fought alone against a dozen Blood Angel's Terminators, until finally the rest of the warband poured onto the spaceship. Kharn was the last to leave the vessel, turned it into a crypt filled with corpses and engulfed in flames, and upon returning to his own cruiser, Kharn ordered the captain to fire upon and sever them from the husk of the enemy ship. During the 13th Black Crusade, he once again unleashed his fury upon the Imperium of mankind, joining a handful of the most frenzied Kharnate berserkers in the battle against the defending legions of the Emperor's warriors on Cardia. Throughout his long life as a servant of the Blood God, Kharn has crisscrossed the galaxy, dyeing the soil of thousands and thousands of worlds red in the glory of his bloodthirsty master. Despite his drive to destroy the Imperium, Abaddon the Despoiler has repeatedly exploited this, luring Kharn into his armies. The Betrayer's main incentive is the collection of skulls. The most coveted are the heads of humans, though any other enemy can become a worthy offering to Kharn. Kharn has claimed the lives of representatives from almost every kind of humans, aliens or demons who travel among the stars or dwell beneath them. Hive tyrants of the Tyranids, Necron overlords, Aeldari autarchs and Orcs warbosses, all they have felt the bite of the Gorechild. The Betrayer knows that to Kharn it doesn't matter from where the blood flows as long as it does. At Diamor, It was precisely the involvement of Kharn and his Khornate berserkers that decided the outcome of the battle. The forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Blood Angels, and the Legio Titanicus stood against the aggression and bloody massacre of the Chaos Spacemarine warband. At the height of the confrontation, the forces of Kharn arrived. Numerous Dreadclaw drop pods descended from the sky, and the betrayer himself joined the fray. He personally destroyed several Imperial Knights and a Reaver-class Titan. Unable to reach its princeps from the ground, Kharn climbed onto a ruined building near the Titan and managed to leap onto its shoulder, after which he hacked his way through the armor and hull, slaughtering all inside. The Imperial St. Celestine fell to his axe. After the opening of the Great Rift, Kharn felt the immediate presence of the saint and rushed in search of her. In the battle for the oceanic planet Sadrika, Kharn was fully consumed by the influence of Khorne. Neither the Imperial Fists, the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus, nor even the Sisters of Battle could stop the Mad Butcher. Kharn engaged in a duel with Celestine and managed to behead her, thereby fulfilling the prophecy to which both he and the living saint had so fervently aspired. Only the bravest warlords of chaos would take Kharn into their service, for summoning the traitor is often equally a display of foolishness and desperation. Allies of Kharn can never be sure that he will not turn against them if the enemy proves unworthy of his axe, or if no opponents are left near the traitor after the tide of battle recedes. On more than one occasion, renegade Space Marine bands have followed their own enemies into the grave, when Kharn fiercely beheaded them, not finding new enemies to kill. The only warriors who willingly fight alongside Kharn are the World Eaters, Khornate berserkers, drawn by legends of the traitor's bloody deeds. These mad butchers live only for slaughter and death, and the sole purpose of their existence is murder in the name of the blood god. When the time comes and Khorne demands their own skulls, they will go joyfully, offering their own necks and shouting the name of their god. A few heretical scholars have speculated that Kharn killed more warriors of the World Eaters' Legion than all their enemies combined. Kharn, the betrayer, will never stop killing. It remains unknown whether the cause of this might be the bloody madness passed on to Kharn from Angron during the Horus heresy, or the taint of chaos that stained his soul at the moment the betrayer turned his gaze to Khorne. However, an unquenchable fury blazes in the mind of the World Eater. As long as Kharn breathes, he will offer lives to the blood god until it is his turn to surrender his own. Gorechild chain axe. The teeth of the chain axe are the teeth pulled from the jaws of the Mica dragons from the death world of Luther MacIntyre, and its handle is forged from adamantium. Even in less skilled hands, which certainly cannot be said about Kharn, the butcher's nails could cleave a space marine in power armor from head to groin, while the betrayer is capable of delivering destructive strikes with lethal precision. In particularly fierce combat, Kharn attaches the axe to his hand with chains. Legends state that within the walls of the Imperial Palace, he killed more than 1 million defenders of the Loyalists before the Gorechild slipped from his grasp. However, due to the vast amount of myths surrounding the betrayer, it's very difficult to discern truth from fiction. Nonetheless, the Gorechild remain a compelling reminder that some sons of Angron are favoured more than others. Death counter built into Kharn's helmet is an archaic device known as the Death Counter. It overlays digital inscriptions in ancient High Gothic onto the betrayer's field of vision, showcasing the number of kills made by the Berserk during a campaign. Kharn takes pride in the fact that long ago, this device was gifted to him by Warmaster Horus himself. In the current era of decline, the Imperium could not create such a device due to the slow loss of technological and scientific knowledge. Perhaps at one time the Death Counter helped Kharn collect trophies for his legion's mysterious contest, though now others perceive the device as a madman's obsession with keeping count of his kills. Power armor. Kharn is clad in an ancient, battered suit of power armor, missing the pauldron and plate of the left arm. The betrayer's armor is a mix of mortal craftsmanship and the iconography of chaos. Being among the first to adopt the red and bronze of the Eightfold Path, Kharn and his warriors stripped their armour of imperial symbols in the late days of the Horus heresy, replacing them with decorations of bloodied skulls and gladiatorial chains. From the betrayer's belt and arm hang the skulls of his most memorable enemies on chains. Archaeotech Plasma Pistol. For a long time, Kharn has preferred to select a plasma pistol as his personal weapon because, with a single accurate shot, he can bring down even a heavily armoured enemy from a distance. Plasma Pistol, with which he fought in the Siege of Terror, a twisted and dark weapon combining both ancient technologies of the Mechanicum and the supernatural gifts of the Warp, blessing of the Blood God. Kharn, the most favoured mortal servant of Khorne, hence he is endowed with protection against sorcery, granted to the betrayer by his master. Such is Khorne's disdain for witchery that the power of psychers has no effect on Kharn, and their psychokinetic weapons fail to work when they strike the frenzied Khornate berserker. Kharn's helmet, World Eater's icons depicted as all-devouring maws, claw marks of a xenomorph left by an unworthy and now dead foe, tubes for oxygen and nutrient supply are also used for the delivery of combat adrenaline stimulants, Khornate fetishes of fury being the skulls of mercilessly slain lesser beings, Kharn's armour channels for blood so that Kharn could bleed as do his enemies. Additional vox ports for intimidating enemies with mighty battle cries of Khorne. Hung on chains are the skulls of the most worthy and defeated enemies. The fanged skull of slaughter, a blessed icon of eternal rage of the blood god. Gorechild, the engine of the chain axe, blood of those slain by Kharn serving as fuel and lubricant. Teeth of the mica dragon, capable of easily biting through bone and muscle, even without power supply. The weapon's handle wrapped in the skin flayed from the flesh of cowards. Plasma pistol, a rigid case made from the skull of a warp fiend, extremely resistant to weapon fatigue. Crystalline charging coils, xenotech of the Dark Mechanicum, synchronized plasma delivery for an increased dosage of injection. Armored cooling barrel dampening backfire and plasma trail.